Okay, can I start the meeting in open session, and can I begin by welcoming members? Could I advise members of the need to maintain social distancing during the meeting, and could I provide a brief overview of the day's business? The committee today will consider a briefing from wedding and funeral car representatives in relation to taxi legislation, a departmental briefing on the second cycle flood risk management plan and reservoirs consultation, and a written briefing on the consideration of draft budget responses to Committee for Finance. Could I advise members that, as some members are joining remotely, to please use the hand up icon to ensure that we get succinctly through the meeting. Could I also remind members to mute their mic when they're not speaking, which would allow everybody to follow the evidence and follow the meeting. Advise members also that this room must be vacated by 1 p.m. at the latest, and request that members bear that in mind when asking questions. We have an apology from Patrick Delargy. I'm not seeing any other apologies. No one has made me aware of any, so we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is chairperson's business. I have none. Agenda item number 3, which is draft minutes. Members will know that I myself was unable to be present last week. I thank the Deputy Chair for standing in. And draft minutes are at page 6 of the 2nd of February 2022. So I will actually ask the Deputy Chair to sign those, but are members content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting? Agreed? Agreed. And the Deputy Chair will sign that as Chair of that committee. Agenda item number 4, which is matters arising. At page 17, matters arising from the meeting on the 2nd of February 2022. Can I ask members if there are any issues arising from the meeting? Don't see any. Page 20, outstanding committee requests for information. Members are content. Agenda item number 5, which is correspondence, and can I draw members' attention to correspondence memo at page 27. One issue that I see there that I know has been on the mind for a lot of members for some time, and our frustrations have been bore out in terms of the Audit Office report into the planning system and the review. It's quite concerning, members. Obviously, members have been on record in this committee spelling out their concerns of the current delays facing and the problems facing our planning system. There is no doubt in my mind that it is stifling development, it is stifling inward investment, and it's something that really the department do need to get a grip of. And I know this committee wants to play its active role in ensuring that we can have an efficient and effective planning service for the benefit of Northern Ireland. I don't know if members wish to have any comment on that. I know we do have a briefing coming from the department in relation to it. I'm not sure if it's next week or the week after. But we can look into that. But there is a briefing coming in response to that review. I see Andrew indicating he wants to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose there's 2 issues. The Audit Office report in relation to planning is subject to a PAC inquiry, and our first hearing in relation to that is on Thursdays tomorrow. The other one is the review of the Planning Act 2011. That is separate, and I understand officials are due to come in relation to that, and I am, and I've expressed this, frustrated at the lack of ambition really in terms of the outcome of that review. I think it's important that we do speak to officials when they come in. I think Vincent will keep writing this. I think it's next week they're coming in.
Yeah, no, it's fair point. Yeah, so that is the case. So look, I think that's a point in which members can get across at that meeting. The audit report is obviously very worrying as an element of concern for members, so we will certainly bring that point up. I see Liz Kimmins raising her hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose just, similar to what Andrew said in terms of the report, I think it would be good for us to maybe put on record as committee our disappointment at the review. And I suppose one of the things that really struck me, and I know we're going to discuss it in more detail next week, is the the issues around statutory consultees. I know that's certainly something we hear here on the ground in my own constituency. So, I just think that it's, instead of looking at how we reform it, it's more delays, and I just think that I wish there'd be more we could do to try and reform and improve the processing, but it's just delay, indecision, and I think it would be good if we could put that on the record as well, but we can discuss it in more detail with the officials next week.
Happy to do so. In fact, maybe what members could do, if there was agreement, was we could write to the department in response to the Audit Office report, expressing our concern and obviously we would have the officials before the committee, but I think it might be a good idea to put on record those concerns. Members agreed with that action point? Agreed? Agreed. Thanks. Okay, members, we will now go on to, I take it nobody else has any other issue of correspondence they want to raise with? No. So we'll now go on to agenda item number 6, which is a briefing from the Wedding and Car Representatives Taxi Legislation, tabled at page 3, page 9, tabled at page 21 and 23, and we'll wait for representatives to take their seats.
Morning.
Okay. I'll give you time to get a drop of water.
Are we okay to take the mask off?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, members, and can I welcome attending in person Mr. Mike Barr, Wedding Vehicle Association, and Mr. Peter McCracken, Wedding Vehicle Association, attending in person, and also attending via Starleaf. Can I welcome Mr. Nick Britton, National Association of Funeral Directors, and Mr. Andrew McMullen, McMullen's Funerals. You are all very welcome to the committee this morning. I know this is an issue that has particularly grained many of you for some time. Certainly, I think COVID has brought to light a lot of the plight that's been facing many within the industry, particularly those facing on the funeral aspect of this, but indeed also more recently the plight of wedding car associations has really come to the fore for the committee, and the committee have been writing to the department in relation to this particular issue, albeit maybe a different angle. But certainly we thought it would be worthwhile giving you the opportunity to spell out to the committee your concerns before we meet with officials following this meeting today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you guys, whatever way you want to take it, to give a presentation to the committee, followed by questions.
Certainly will. Thank you very much indeed for your time, first of all. As you rightly say, Mr. Buckley, this has been an ongoing issue over the past 17 years for us. Now, it hasn't been without its merits. We've been exempted from a range of different aspects of the taxi legislation, including roof signs and things like that, which obviously wouldn't be suitable on a wedding car. But yes, we've been speaking to Minister Mallon and the representatives from the DFI, Department of Infrastructure, and the DVA, basically to let her know how much worse things have got post-COVID. So obviously we've had very much difficulty in getting drivers to work for us. Mike will have the figures there, but over the past 8 years we've seen a reduction in drivers from 15,802 licences to 8,555 taxi licences.
It's a 46% drop.
Yeah.
Now, that's overall taxi licences, and so that shows. And this drop there's a strong correlation there between 2014, when this excessive regulation was introduced about the taxi theory test and the CPC training, which is all very burdensome. It's a steady decline of 46% since that time. And then the department are wondering why there's no taxis in Belfast on a Saturday night. Now, we're not here to fight specifically for taxis, but we are a combined voice now, because the taxi industry are also struggling to find drivers, as well as the funeral operators. So we have kind of come together in some respect to try and put our case forward as a stronger case, where previously, we have been fighting the department now for 17 years, and unfortunately it's falling on deaf ears, and we have put forward so many arguments, which Pete is going to present very shortly, but we're just grateful to be here today where we can present it to you, and hopefully we can get some answers on why it's taken so long and what they're actually prepared to do, because so far we've just had no. There's been no offer of what they can do, and any offer has been very small, and it's been of no help to us at all.
I think our particular issue, and I'm sure the funeral guys are exactly the same, weddings are seasonal, as you well know, from April through until the end of October, September time. Really, that's where we're busy. So we're offering part-time jobs for part-time drivers. Now, to get their licence, they currently need to spend in excess of £500 for a first-time application, to include training on how to become a taxi driver, to include a theory test, a hazard perception test, and also a practical driving test. So, as you can imagine, for somebody, a taxi driver who can work about between 40 and 50 hours a week, making upwards of £25 an hour, we can offer somebody a 0 hour contract where they can hope to earn £9 to £10 an hour, working about 10 hours a week. You know, so it seems ridiculous that our drivers are needing to go through the same amount of training for a much lesser job. I don't know whether the funeral guys want to pick up on anything regarding their drivers there.
Anyone from the Funeral Association wish to comment on that particular aspect?
Sorry, Andrew, you go. No, Andrew, you go first. Go on.
No, I just want to just comment on what the fellow from the wedding car said. You know, we're exactly the same. Most of our drivers, or a lot of PSV drivers that we need for limousines, are part-time. We've got full-time staff in most businesses, but a lot of it depends on part-time. And the costs of getting a driver, training them, put them through the test, and then they continue in CPC training. Like last night, I spent 3.5 hours at a training, which the trainer at the start said that this is totally irrelevant to you. You really shouldn't be doing it. We have to go through that every year, so I concur with what Mike has said there. So,
yeah, I mean, it's the drivers are immediately put off because of it is very cumbersome what they have to go through. I mean, the theory test itself has a pass rate of 21.9. The department told me 24. I got 21, so I could be wrong, but it's low. With some years, the actual pass rate of that test was as low as 10%. Now, if that was a child's AQE exam, the examining board would be hung out to dry. This has been going on for 8 years, and yet no one has picked up on the low rates. I had a driver go through it recently. He's an advanced driver. He failed the theory test 3 times and wasn't going to continue on. And the girl said to him in the actual course in Ballymena, said, "No, this is perfectly normal. Everybody fails it." I mean, it's madness. And, you know, it's all also geared toward taxiing. You know, we're sending our drivers to do these tests, the theory test and the actual practical test and the CPC training. There's no mention of chauffeur work. There's not a mention of weddings. I mean, the guys who take the course when we go in say, "Guys, we know you shouldn't be here. I know this is not relevant to you. You just have to sit through the course and do your time." And we're like, what is the point of me? And it's, you know, I'm trying to run a business.
Of course.
And for me to have somebody out, I have to pay them to attend. I have to pay for them to go. And it's not just the money, it's irrelevant. And the big point is, wedding car and funeral operators in England, Scotland and Wales are all exempt from all of this. Why Northern Ireland, because the department did a consultation in 2005 to reform the Taxi Act, they did not consult one single wedding car company, one single funeral car company, and yet they made up rules and regulations, they reformed because there were regulations in place already. At that time, 2005, the wedding industry was changing. It was becoming quirky. New vehicles were coming in, you know, like stretch limousines, Volkswagen Beetles as wedding cars. And at that time, they wouldn't even let them, you know, we had to PSV them. England, Scotland, Wales, business booming. We couldn't even PSV a left-hand drive or a convertible or a 2-door car. The legislation was so out of touch with what we want as an industry that in the original legislation, I'm nearly sure, Pete, that they asked us to have taxi signs on the roof and our drivers to wear a badge. And we had to point this out to them. The department, 17 years, you know, and that's why we're here today, because we have reached, like, the frustration, as you can tell, and I'm sorry, I roll with my heart over some of it, but it is massive, and it is really unjust. And, you know, a bus driver called me this morning wanting to part-time work. He used to drive my kids to school. Very nice guy, brilliant driver. And he said, "Can I drive because I have a PSV bus driver?" I says, "No, you can't, because you need a PSV taxi licence. Even though we are not taxis, we have never said we're taxis." Have any of you ever thought of a wedding car as a taxi? A funeral car, is it a taxi? No. So they're asking us to do all this unnecessary work with drivers, and yet I can't even use a bus driver. Now, a bus is a massive taxi. If they want to class a wedding car as a taxi, yet I can't use a bus driver to drive a wedding car. I can't even drive a truck, bring a truck driver in, even though they do the CPC. They've got their PSV license because they're driving vehicles. I have to use taxi drivers. We can't get taxi drivers because taxi drivers, they can make more in their own car. It's their own business. They're full-time commercial drivers. We're using guys mostly who are retired people. And, you know, they want a couple of hours, they want casual work. And this is why it does not work for us.
And if I could just jump in there, Mike's just raised a very interesting point there. You know, a lot of our guys are retired, taxi drivers, ambulance drivers, police drivers. But because of this ongoing CPC training, which costs approximately £400 for each renewal over the course of 5 years, a lot of them are giving that up because it's unnecessary, a cost that they can afford to have without. So we're losing that pool of drivers as their licences come up for expiring. The other thing with the 46% decrease in the amount of drivers, even drivers who would have came in and done like a Saturday with us, you know, they're making enough money now throughout the week that they don't need to do work on Saturday. You know, they can go down to the bar with their friends, they can go out with the kids, they can do anything else other than come and do another job to make an extra couple of pounds. You know, so I mean, it really is a very, very difficult situation.
We sense the frustration and the anger, desperation from those within the wedding car industry. I could ask the Funeral Association in relation to the impact on your particular sector with this particular piece of legislation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And actually, just before I start, I'd just like to say thanks very much indeed for inviting us along today. I know it was done at very short notice, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time. We've heard a lot of the issues already today, and I'm sure you are very aware of a lot of the issues that have been brought up over the last few years, certainly by Mike and the taxi association, and the wedding car association. Now, there are two key issues, I think, in terms of the funeral profession, and Mr. Buckley, I think you touched upon right at the start the fact that these have been really brought to light over COVID. Now, the two issues really that have come to the fore are a shortage of drivers, because during the pandemic, limousines were prohibited by the Northern Ireland government, and so drivers just simply went elsewhere. They had to find work. They couldn't drive. They had to find work. They've either retired or they found other work. And as we come back out of COVID, there aren't enough drivers. There simply aren't enough drivers. What that means is that impacts on the services that funeral directors can offer for bereaved people. Now, you'll know that limousines are part of the traditions of funerals, particularly in Northern Ireland, and being unable to offer that service as readily as funeral directors would like to is having a significant impact, not just on their business, but also on bereaved people. The second one is cost, really, and funeral directors have operated under the tightest of restrictions over the last 2 years. Many have been continuing to offer what is a very vital service, but doing so at a loss, simply because a lot of the things where they would make money as a business, they've not been able to do because of the restrictions. And when you add that to what is a rather prohibitive demands of licensing, of testing, of CPC training, it's not just costing firms hundreds of pounds, it's costing firms thousands of pounds. And a lot of these are small firms, small businesses, margins are tight, and they simply cannot afford to do it. So it's having a significant effect on their business. But as we've all heard this morning, this has been going on for a long time. So I guess it's important to look at really what's changed, why now, and what's changed, and what really we're looking for you guys, as a committee. I think, and Mike Barr very kindly sort of touched on this at the start. I think there is now starting to become a real united front, not just individual organisations looking at this legislation and realising that it's either anomalous or it's out of date or it's simply unhelpful. But certainly the Wedding Car Association, the funeral profession, there are others within the tourism sector, and we are we are all kind of talking about this together. I was over at Stormont yesterday. I had a meeting with Mike and others around this. And I think there is much more of a sense of a united voice about this. And I think that's important because I think it brings into play, if you take a sort of more holistic an overview of the damaging regulations that are caused by this law, how widespread, and how cross-sector they actually are. So really, it comes to what do we want? What do we want to happen? I think that with a new parliamentary mandate forthcoming in the next few months, plus the fact that we are all coming out of COVID and hopefully returning to a situation where life goes back to normal and we rebuild, now is exactly that perfect time for change. I have to say we have been very disappointed by the reaction of Minister Mallon. When we wrote to her at the back end of last year, I felt that she was rather dismissive and brushed herself without answering the very specific and key points that we raised, and just simply giving us an excuse of road safety. Well, funeral cars, as you will be well aware, are some of the slowest vehicles on the road, and some of the safest vehicles on the road, and probably go slower than bikes. So just a simple road safety issue, I'm afraid she didn't wash with us. And we don't feel that she is willing and has been willing, or indeed will be willing, to engage with us properly. So this is why we're kind of here today to speak to you. As we've heard already, in England, Scotland and Wales, limousines with up to 8 passengers don't require a licence for wedding and funerals. They are exempt. All we want really is parity. That's what we want. We want parity with them, because funeral businesses in Northern Ireland are being penalised unfairly compared to their colleagues across the rest of the UK. Now, how that happens? Well, there are myriad ways. There's changes to the legislation. There is a legislative consent motion that can be investigated, which will simply allow Northern Ireland to adopt the Westminster regulations, as I've just laid out. There are, I understand, exemptions that can be granted from within the existing legislation. There are plenty of ways to address this, but none of them can be addressed if nobody wants to listen. And that is why I throw myself at your feet this morning to an extent, because what we need, I think, here today, what we need from you as a committee is your support to commit to drive for that change. You are in a very privileged position, I think, of having the power to effect that change, to put the necessary pressure on the Department civil servants and government ministers to force a rethink and a review, and really to help the important professions, help the people of Northern Ireland that they serve. So that's where we are from the funeral professions side of things. Andrew, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything just in terms of, that's just got a wider holistic view of things. Andrew, I didn't know whether you wanted to come in and add anything in terms of the day-to-day effect this is having on your business. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Andrew, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah. Good morning, and thanks for allowing us the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm a funeral director, but also represent the National Association of Funeral Directors. On a survey of, and I love what impacts us has already been covered by both Nick and the guys from the wedding industry. But like in a survey of our members, most members have struggled to get drivers and retrain them, as has been said. That's the biggest issue. A way back when the legislation came in, I think it was Alec Boyle from the department, he worked in the department, he told us back then that limousines should not have been included in the legislation. That struggle's been on ever since. And I think during COVID, it became more of, as brought up to the fore, as been said, I suppose which has really impacted and annoyed a lot of funeral directors is that during COVID, even though they keep telling us we're classed as taxis on honest legislation, but when the Department of Health stopped us using limousines, said we must not use limousines for funerals. But when it came round to giving out financial help to taxi drivers, they all got. but excluded anybody working at funerals. So, for instance, I have 2 part-time drivers who work to me. They didn't work for the most of a year. One of them now has not renewed his training. He said it's pointless, and he's not spending 35 hours of his life on something that the trainer says is not relevant at all to him. So really, it has a big impact. And I know funeral directors who now are refusing. Or not refusing, they're not allowing limousines to go out because they haven't drivers to drive them. Okay. It has a big impact on us.
Listen, thank you. And look, I will give you an opportunity if you have anything further you want to add before we go to questions, or if you want to go to questions.
I think, just if I can pick up there, I mean, Alec Boyle, as Andrew mentioned there, was very supportive of us, and he admitted to us also across the table that we shouldn't have been brought in, and there was an error, there was a flaw because of the consultation process, that, you know, these rules have been written for us without consulting us. So there was an error there at the very start, which we have we've been fighting against ever since.
What was that name again?
Alec Boyle, wasn't it? Or Alex Boyle? Yeah, he was the head of the taxi department at the time, and he was very sympathetic. Everyone since has really, despite we've had great support from political parties, MLAs, MPs, everything, but the department since Alec has left seem to be a law unto themselves. They will not listen. They have not lifted a finger to help us. They don't reply to emails. Well, it takes a long time if they do. And they've constantly used the excuse since day one that it's going to take 2 years to change primary legislation. So we've heard this for 17 years. Had they done it 17 years ago, we would have been fine by now. But in the last 18 months, Pete identified within the legislation there is actually a certificate of exemption that can be used. And it can be used to lift us out and end this, and it also will close the Class C loophole for the taxi guys. That'll keep them happy. I don't understand why they won't use this exemption. It's a simple request.
Yeah, I think as well, other than the driver issue, wedding cars have a specific difficulty in getting vehicles PSV'd. I've actually given you a wee handout there. This gives you a couple of pictures.
No, we'll look through it.
Yeah. So the first one there, the most ridiculous one, I've shown you there, 3 vehicles exactly the same in every way, shape and form, same step height, same construction, and 2 of them are allowed to be PSV'd because they were PSV'd before 2016. One of them's not because it was after 2016. You know, and it just doesn't make sense. So yes, as Mike rightly says, we have identified a certificate of exemption, which unfortunately Minister Mallon has stated that she isn't keen to use. But the other way round it would be, you know, I've also given you a list there of all what we've been exempt from previously. But if we were exempted from Section 7, Part 2 of the Taxi Licensing Regulations 2015, then we'll be allowed to get our vehicles PSV'd. If we're exempted from Section 4, 1 and 2 of the Taxi Driver Regulations 2014, then that will remove the need for our drivers to sit a test to attain a PSV licence, and it will remove the need for continual or CPC training. So therefore, we just apply for a licence, we get the PSV licence, and we're able to get drivers, and it will be easy.
That's the way it used to be. Your driver used to get an access NI check and a medical. Then we would assess their driving and make sure they have a clean licence. We don't want people driving our cars, some of which are very valuable, who, you know, don't have clean licences. They're vintage cars as well. They're entirely different than a lot of them are. And just on Pete's point of the PSV testing, England, Scotland, Wales are also exempt from PSV. In fact, I don't think England, Scotland, Wales have to even MOT a car because of the new 40 years exemption, which is a bad thing, right? What my point is, I am not opposed to any regulation if it fits our industry. I'm sure Andrew's the same. If it's fair and if it's in proportion to what we do, but a one size fits all, and they'll argue it's not because there's 4 classes, it does not work. We are not taxis. Andrew is not a taxi. We want lifted out and at least to be given an exemption until the department can get their house in order, because at the minute, as the funeral guys, the taxi guys and all the wedding people will testify, it is an absolute mess.
It's in the department. Okay, well listen, can I thank you both for your presentation this morning. I think nobody sitting around the committee could not be compelled by your evident frustration as to the journey you've been on. And, you know, I suppose probably hearing that this has been 17 years in the making, I find it quite worrying, actually, and members may have an opinion on this, and certainly we will towards officials, that you seem to have been told some 17 years ago that it was a mistake that you were included.
Time and time again, unfortunately.
Yeah, but yet we still have a situation where you are. Now that to me spells, obviously the minister's more recent, but it spells that there's a long-term issue here within the department towards addressing and sorting this issue out. That's something we will take up with officials. But in relation to where we are today, what has your engagement with Minister Mallon been to date on this issue? And for example, when you mentioned the temporary exemptions, what is the response? Because obviously the big concern for the committee here is that we know the vital service that the funeral industry play in our communities. We know the difficulties that the wedding car industry are facing. We know the difficulties that the taxi sector are facing, particularly on a shortage of workforce. And I think the starting figure, when you look at your own industry from the wedding car perspective, 15,000 down 46% since 2014. You know, if that's multiplied out across the respective industries.
No, that is licensed taxi drivers, because we have to pull. So that is the entire amount of taxi drivers spread over the three industries. But so it's reduced by 46%, which is
that's even more relevant, because that suggests to me that we're in serious problems.
Oh, there's a serious problem.
So my opinion would be that this can't be continue to be kicked down the line, and I actually do recognise your plea in terms of, yes, a full review of the Taxi Act, but given that this is going to, obviously we're in time now in this mandate, given that this is going to take 2 to 3 years, what can be done to help you guys immediately? So I suppose my question to you right now would be, what can the department do right now which would help you in this current
They can make use of the certificate of exemption, I would have thought. I mean,
that would be the easiest outcome, you know, if they were to enact. Now, it's mentioned in those taxi licensing regulations 2015, it's Annex 5, I believe, and that literally is a signed document from the department to say that this vehicle specifically is exempt. So therefore, we MOT the vehicle, we have hire and reward insurance, and we get a normal, decent driver to drive it. But we don't need to PSV the car, and we don't need to have a PSV driver to use it. So that would be the simplest way that the department could move forward.
Going forward, I mean, Pete and I have said time and time again, there is a compromise that we will work with them in any way. I mean, Pete, if we're honest, I mean, worst case scenario, yes, we'd like to be brought into line with England, Scotland, Wales, if possible. But if we have to PSV the vehicles, it's not the end of the world for us, because the PSV, they check the insurance, but it's essentially the same as an MOT test, except for you have to have a fire extinguisher and they check your insurance. That's the only real difference between the two. But it costs us £108 per vehicle. Now, I have 15 wedding cars, Pete, I think you've 40. So that is a massive, you know, it's a massive cost to us as well. But yeah, I think that the certificate of exemption is the best. We've been down this road before. Chris Hazard almost had this across the line for us back in 2016, was it?
2016.
And he instructed them to go and do a full review, because we had been on and the taxi guys were on, and Stormont collapsed and the whole thing was pushed back. Now, obviously, with what happened last week, we are very concerned about, you know, this going back to square one, and we're going to have to start with new ministers and start campaigning and lobbying from scratch, which Pete and I really don't want to do. We understand that there's not enough time to change primary legislation, so the certificate of exemption, take us out of it, and then they can assess going forward. We'll meet with them, and if they want to regulate us to some degree that fits our industries, we'll work with them.
And I'm going to go to other members here, but so finally, your engagement with Minister Mallon to date, when you put this particular example to her in relation to temporary certification in terms of exemptions.
Yes, that has been taken to her, and initially Minister Mallon was very supportive, but as I said, she U-turned and kind of, we were very surprised that she didn't go through with it, because what our arguments, what we feel and what we hope you guys feel, it's common sense. It's not something new. This has been tried and tested in England, Scotland and Wales. You know, no matter, I don't want to get into political views, but we're still part of the UK in some shape or form. So why are we being persecuted for running our businesses in Northern Ireland?
I think her exact response was basically that, yes, she's aware that she could use the certificate of exemption, but instead she's going to recommend to the next minister that the full review is carried out of the primary legislation. But as you have correctly said, that's going to take a process of 2 to 3 years. And, you know, in 2 to 3 years, it's not a big leap to say there might not be some of us left in 2 to 3 years, the way things are going.
No, this,
You know.
I hear the plea. You know, this department has forum for delay, and it's certainly something that this committee is in the business of trying to get a result that will help you guys in a very difficult place. But I'm going to go to other members now for their views on the matter, and I'll start with the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair, and guys, you're very welcome this morning, and we can certainly hear your frustrations and bordering on anger, I suppose, in relation to what you have brought to us this morning. I do think you're pushing at an open door with the committee, to be honest. I think it is a fair request, to be honest with it, because other members have been raising it on a regular basis here. When I was Mayor of Carrickfergus, I had the pleasure of speaking at the Funeral Directors Association conference when it was held there on the afters, and I have to say it was some crack. Very enjoyable. So, certainly wasn't a dull evening. So I also believe in 2012 Minister Durkin had some information on this as well presented to him, and even in 2012 that particular minister also agreed that we should move forward.
I sat in on that meeting, and he instructed the department to go and do something about it, and they left that meeting.
That was the special novelty vehicle consultation that went out.
Yeah, and they totally ignored us on that as well.
Totally ignored.
They left that meeting kind of with their tail between their legs, I think, and they realised, oh, we have to do something now. And then I can't remember what happened. Just as usual, it was fobbed off and it was pushed down the line. I mean, it's been 17 years, and
That particular one, they released a consultation on the use of special occasion and novelty vehicles. And actually, that did give us some credit, because at that stage we were allowed to PSV the convertible cars, left-hand drive cars, American stretch limousines, and two-door cars. So
we had to fight for all that as well.
Yeah, so I mean that's what that consultation came out as, which was very, very welcome. But then unfortunately these regulations came out in 2015, which basically put an end to all of that again.
Right, so all these sort of step forwards then became
Big
lost in the ether somewhere, basically,
yeah.
at the end of the day. So that's obviously disappointing, going back even to Mr. Durkin's time. The Minister does seem to emphasise road safety to a certain degree. Would there be an accident rate available for?
I asked the department for that yesterday, and I said, what specific evidence have you given that mean that wedding cars should be included in this taxi act? And they said, we have no specific figures or data on wedding cars, but you know the accident rate is ridiculously low. It's sorry, Pete. Just as a contrast, Minister Mallon said it was down to road safety. Now, she gives us a very generic answer every time, and I think last year or 2 years ago, Minister Mallon exempted all classic cars from MOT testing.
Right, yeah.
How is that improving road safety? I own several classic cars, and I'm grateful for the MOT system. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to argue that, but if she exempted classic cars from MOT, how is that making our road safety? She also put out a consultation last year on making MOTs biannual for modern day cars. How is that improving road safety? Because I can tell you last year, and I'm a car guy, I check cars, I'm always on top of the cars, I'm underneath them. I took my wife's car up last year, and checked the tyres, and I went up, and the inside of the tyre, there was the wire had come through, because you couldn't see it from, you'd have to crawl under. And I was grateful for the MOT centre for finding that. Now, by making an MOT biannual, that might not have been found. And I don't see where the logic is that we're a hazard to road safety when there's no figures to support it. Yet she's removing classic cars entirely from the MOT system, and she's putting out a consultation on making MOTs biannual. I mean, there's no logic.
It seems like a broad brush sort of
Yeah.
comment to make on road safety when she's not dealing with figures. I totally agree with your views on parity with the United Kingdom, but would you be aware of what happens in the Irish Republic at all?
No, I'm not honestly sure. I think they have
They do have to go through a PSV system, but I'm not sure about the entire thing. But there is an application process and there is a specific driver, but I don't believe it's a taxi driver licence that you require for that, because they only have a certain amount down in the Republic.
Yeah.
About how many taxi drivers they can actually give licences to. So I think it's separate what they have for weddings and funerals and limousines.
Okay,
things
no,
like
that's
that.
fair on. No, that's fine. I say, I think you're pushing at an open door, and certainly the drop in drivers is, you know, I look around and see taxi drivers in my area, and I deliver in Amazon parcels.
Yeah, that's it.
People have found a different occupation to do
Yeah.
during this COVID. So
I mean, beyond wedding cars and funeral cars, I see that as a potential crisis. You know, you think of young girls and young kids, students walking home on a Saturday night because they can't get a taxi. You know,
the safety issues there too.
there
much so.
there is potential, and it is, unfortunately, it's bound to happen. And because if you, and I've been, I mean, I go out in Belfast regularly on a Saturday night, I cannot get a taxi home. And so again, I'm not here to fight taxis, but we are in some degree in the same boat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chair. And again, if members want to wish, whether it's a question directed towards the Funeral Association, which are online, or the wedding industry in the room. But again, if anybody online feels that they want to jump in, please do. So next question is Andrew Muir.
Sorry, thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for everyone for joining us. And I probably would agree with Mr. Hilditch that in the good elements you're pushing an open door in relation to this, and there needs to be reform, and it's important that the institutions are in place to allow that to take effect if and when that comes along. Just a couple of questions. You did mention that there was some aspects of the Taxi Act you managed to get disapplied. I just wanted to know a bit more about how you managed to get that done in terms of making the case for that change. The other one is really obviously the concerns are coming back from the department in relation to safety and the reasons for having these arrangements in place. And I just wanted maybe to help us make the case for yourself, which is important, how you feel you can give the assurance to the department that the safety standards that you do have at the moment can be upheld in the future.
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of how we got exempted from previous aspects of legislation, it was very, very similar form to this, with meetings involved. Now, currently we're exempted from the operator licensing in its totality. So we don't need to specify our operating centre, keep booking records, have complaint records, things like that. But in terms of the look of the actual vehicle, where wedding cars are concerned, whenever this was first enacted, we had to display a taxi roof sign saying about just a normal taxi sign, if you can imagine, on top of a vintage style car. We got that taken off, obviously, from common sense. The external taxi plates that you would have fixed onto the bumpers in the boot and the side windows, they've all gone as well. We don't have to use a taxi meter. We don't have to operate under the maximum fare structure. We don't have to have a taxi printer. And our drivers also don't have to display the taxi badges while they're driving, because obviously it'll take the look away from what they're wearing, the uniform. So again, that was all common sense things. The thing that we are still technically not allowed to do is a bride and groom are not allowed to have a glass of champagne, newly married, on their way to the reception, because you're not allowed to consume alcohol in a PSV vehicle. Now, obviously, nobody's going to sort of enforce that too hard, but technically, we shouldn't be allowing them to do that, which I'm sure all agree is rather ridiculous.
Yeah. But you're saying you managed to get those changes because they were common sense, but some of the stuff that's been outlined to us today also seems to be common sense. You know, the idea that you'd have to have the sign on top of the vehicle, is bonkers. But some of this other stuff that has been made the case for, you've been asking for this for a number of years and you haven't got any progress. So, I think the department need to build upon what they were able to give to you previously, and also to take into account, there is been cited by the department the safety concerns, and I think it's important that we're able to come back with that in terms of the reassurance that is not a serious risk that people need to worry about. So I think the chair will probably come back in relation to this, but there's obviously an engagement with officials and the minister in relation to this, because we need to get progress in relation to this. And I entirely agree that the market, the labour force in terms of taxi industry is becoming extremely difficult, because people are moving to other industries as a result of the downturn in trade of the last 2 years. People need security of employment, and that's why they're doing that. So that that's obviously a real concern for myself, and I would say for the rest of the committee.
Can I just say, on the safety aspect, you were asking about safety. I mean, we have addressed some issues, but I mean, for me to find a safe driver, I'm happy to have an access NI check to make sure they're of good repute. Clean license, I don't want any points in their license or any accidents or claim, because it's going to affect my insurance, and I don't want, there has to be some onus on the business owner to regulate as well. I mean, just because somebody gets a taxi license, I'm not just going to immediately employ them. In fact, I had a guy come down recently with a taxi license to drive the car. And, driving a taxi, I'm sure he was a great driver. But when he was in a car that's 40 or 50 years old and on a left-hand drive car with a weird gearbox, and he couldn't drive it. He was it was a disaster. So it doesn't make him a good driver. So an access NI check, happy with. Medical, I'm happy with. Check their license. The CPC training, they say, improves our safety. I can tell you, I've been to many of them, they have not. I have a driver on record who I know, who has written to Minister Mallon with a complaint on the CPC training he went to. And they all say this when we go in, as I mentioned earlier. It goes, boys, I know you shouldn't be here today. I know this has nothing to do. We hear it all the time. And then we have to watch a video about how to fasten a wheelchair into a taxi when it doesn't apply to us. If somebody with a disability is going to book our wedding cars, generally they book a year or 2 years in advance. They'll come down, they'll meet us, they'll figure out, can I get in this car? No, I can't. Okay, we'll not book it. Yes, I can. Fantastic. So it's not like I'm pulling up on a Saturday night outside the Empire and picking somebody up and hoping that we can get them in. But the CPC training, I have a driver on record who went into one. And this is meant to make us safer drivers, okay? He did, I think, probably an hour's worth of talking about, whatever he had to talk about. Then after that hour, he says, right, boys, that's enough. I think we've had enough today. We've learned as much as we're going to learn. We're going to stick on a little video. And he stuck on an adult film. And my driver, who is straight up Christian guy, he was horrified. And he has written to the minister and has not had a response on that.
Thank goodness. So
this is driver safety. It's madness. The CPC is a waste of time in every respect for us. So,
do you mind if I just come in before Mike combusts? Just from the funerals profession's point of view, just to answer a couple of your questions there. Mr. Buckley, you raised in terms of our interaction with Minister Mallon, and then the point about that Mr. Muir raised about road safety and what can we demonstrate. It's very difficult to know what to demonstrate when you are given no indication of what it is that she wants. And what I mean by that is that when we wrote to her with a list of very specific concerns, some of which you have in the briefing document that we supplied to you last week, some of which I've raised today, all we got back was a letter confirming all the stuff that we put in our own letter was true in terms of our involvement within the legislation. And the one line really about this, and the letter was written by Catherine McFerrin, the Private Secretary, says that the Minister would advise that she is responsible for road safety, and that is it. So I don't know what she means by road safety. Does she mean speeding? Does she mean unfit drivers? Does she mean unfit cars? I've no idea. I saw when Mike was making his point there about car safety. Andrew was nodding his head, and he'll give you an indication of what he feels would be proportionate and sensible in terms of car testing. But it's difficult to know and demonstrate, Mr. Muir, what road safety things we can do when we don't actually know what Minister Mallon means when she says the words road safety. And just my final point, Mr. Buckley asked about earlier on about what we want. Well, I think if there is going to be a review, and let's face it, Mike has very eloquently described to us today how he's been through 17 years of this. I've come to it relatively lately, only the last 12 months or so. But he described to us this has been a 17-year-old fight. Now, taxi companies have been going on about this, and the taxi profession have been going on about this for 17 years. Mike, as the wedding cars, have been going on about it for 17 years. The funeral profession, on and off, has been going on about it for 17 years. We can't surely all be wrong, okay? We can't be wrong. We've been promised at regular intervals reviews. We've been promised this and we've been promised that. Ultimately, we've received nothing. So a review is absolutely so important, as early as we could possibly get in the new mandate. But whilst we are waiting for that, we understand our place, I think, in the pecking order here, and we understand, everything else that's going on in the world at the moment that the new mandate will have to cover. Whilst we are waiting for that review to take place, and whilst it's taking place, I would absolutely urge you to recommend to the department that exemptions are put in place, which, as others have said today, can be done at a moment's notice. Thank you.
Okay. Andrew, do you have a follow-up before I move on to the next member?
No, I think that's useful what he's recommended in terms of the actions, which would be the review and also exemptions in the immediate term.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Okay, we're going now to Cathal Boylan, please.
Thank you, Chair, and gentlemen, you are very welcome. For someone who spent years on the Taxis Act, I mean, I'm well versed with it. I certainly do share with you in the fact that for some reason allies were excluded. I mean, clearly I remember Alex Boyle. I mean, you loved him back in the room today. Obviously, you'd be able to change a few things maybe, but just follow on from some of the comments. I mean, and this is to both. And Mike, you've argued a strong case there. I thought you were going to combust, all right?
I think I'm going to one day.
You've argued a very strong case, but I wouldn't get into the buy on the tax. I don't think it's the road safety element, because when the vehicle's either MOT or PSV, that should suffice. You know what I mean? It's up to the individuals then to look after the vehicle for that 12-month period. Just want to go back to what we can do. Clearly, obviously, you don't know what to do in the south in relation to that. And maybe, Chair, we could get the committee staff to try and find out exactly what the model is in the south. But just to find out a wee bit more about, one, clearly, what have the department said why you were excluded? That's one question. Why you've been excluded from the start? And I know maybe make you the best place to answer that. Why you were excluded from the consultation? And I'd like to hear a wee bit more about the exemption certificates. Obviously, we get a chance back in the next mandate, whoever comes back, to look at amending the legislation. But just a wee bit on that, because I know I'm mindful that other members have asked similar questions, but I just want to get in my head exactly where we can go with it on your behalf.
I think it was an oversight on the department's behalf when they reformed the Act in 2005. I mean, not a single wedding car, and I've spoken to them all, and so has Pete, and I'm pretty sure you can ask Andrew as well, but I think it was just an oversight from the department. They put these rules in place, but yet they didn't think to consider the small niche markets within the overall taxi industry. You know, we have never considered ourselves to be part of the taxi industry. We're part of the wedding industry. You know, a prime example is when COVID happened, taxi drivers were key workers, so they were able to continue working, now albeit on a smaller level, and I'm sure they didn't do very well. Weddings were banned by Boris Johnson on the 20th of March. So it clearly shows the difference, but yet every time we ask them why are we still, they keep referring to the fact that there's a paragraph within the legislation says any vehicle carrying passengers for hire and reward are deemed as a taxi. We're not a taxi. You know, is a bus a taxi? No, it's a bus. So why can we not be wedding cars and funeral cars like they are in England, Scotland and Wales? Also, our insurance companies, I mean, my insurance is a fraction of a taxi, so is Pete's. And in my insurance statement, it says hire and reward in connection with weddings and funerals only. That means I cannot go out and use the car to lift a girl and take her to her prom. I can't do a taxi run. I can't take, somebody's granny out for their wedding anniversary. I am limited to that sector only. But yet the department have labelled us as taxis. We're not.
Okay.
Can I just, sorry to jump in, if I could just add to that point, if it helps. I've spoken in the last few months. I've spoken to funeral directors who have been involved with this from the very start, and I just want to underline and concur with what Mike said. When we have asked previously why haven't we been consulted? Why haven't we been asked? It's almost as if the fact that funeral professions, and I say the same no doubt about wedding cars, were just included as a bit of an oversight. And they haven't come and asked us because they didn't really think that we were involved in the first place. And we have to tell them that, yes, we are covered by this legislation. So I think really just to concur what Mike was saying with that. Thanks.
Just, Chair, one final point, Chair. I mean, because what we're getting in the presentation today, either Nick, whoever wants to answer the question, there seems there was simplification in terms of the English, Scottish and Welsh model. I mean, that's what you're portraying to us. Is that what really come out there, or what have they? How did they handle it?
Well, they simply the Westminster government simply exempted wedding and funeral cars with 8 seats or less, which is the kind of standard limo size. If you want 9 seats or more, then you have to get a PSV licence. But the majority are 8 seats or less, and they were simply for weddings and funerals. They just exempted them from the licensing regulations.
In terms of the wedding cars on that, there was a body brought together in England called the NAWCP. It's the National Association of Wedding Car Professionals. And there was a consultation sent out, so they were either sent the consultation or got wind of it, I don't know. But they got together, formed an association like we did. They put their case forward that this is going to ruin the tradition of the wedding and brides and grooms aren't going to be able to get their classic cars and it's going to put business. I've got the document which I'll email it to all of you. And they convinced, the government agreed and they exempted wedding cars.
Well, Mike, as long as you're not spilling any champagne in the back of those limos. Okay, but thank you very much for the responses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cathal. We now go to Roy Beggs.
Thanks for contacting us and highlighting the difficulties you're experiencing. I mean, a 46% reduction in qualified taxi drivers is something we all need to be aware of and review how the whole thing is operating. With that shortage of those who are legally qualified to drive either wedding cars or funeral cars, have you been unable to take some bookings, or perhaps if someone falls sick, been unable to actually provide the driver so that the bride, for instance, or the bereaving family can get the car they're expecting?
Very much so. I mean, as Mike's already said, I've got 38 vehicles. My current, I can take a maximum of 22 vehicles out at any one time at present, because that's how many drivers I've got. That's 16 vehicles sitting in my yard every Saturday that I could have had work for that I'm not allowed to use.
Yeah, we've certainly had exactly that situation. Andrew, did you want to come on this? Because I think you'll be better placed. But we've certainly had situations where we've had to tell our member firms have had to tell bereaved families they can't do it. Go on, Andrew, come in.
Yeah, I would concur with that. In our business alone, we've had to refuse, or not refuse, but unable to provide a limousine for a family. And I know other members, larger firms in Belfast, struggle every day to get drivers, and they are not able to put their limousines out. And we're trying to provide a service at a shorter notice than a wedding car limousines. Like, we're only getting 3, 4, 5 days notice, and funeral directors are really struggling. You know.
Okay. Another reason why we need to do something, I have to say, I'm also astonished that an advanced driver is not deemed qualified to or capable of driving a wedding or funeral car.
Or a bus driver.
Or a qualified bus driver, or a qualified HGV professional driver. I mean,
it's not rocket science.
I have to say, this is ridiculous.
You know.
The 21.9% who currently are only passing the theory test, what particular aspects of it are you aware of that are tripping people up to stopping drivers coming in?
It seems to be most the theory test. The DVA has released a document titled everything you need to know to become a taxi driver, and that's what their theory test is loosely based on. It's not about road signs or safe driving or the highway code. It's based on how to be a taxi driver. So a professional driver, like an advanced driver, they have no clue about how to pass a taxi test.
And I concur with that. I had a member of staff who came from a driving background and was an advanced driver and had driven for years, and he failed his theory test 3 times, and he queried the answers and there was never any response. They just said that was part of the theory test journey. So.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing looks good on paper. You know, yeah, we have to. You know, taxi guys now are being trained and tested. It looks good on paper, but in reality, it does not work. It's not relevant. It's certainly not relevant to wedding cars or funerals. That's for sure. But you know, the overall thing, it simply doesn't work.
Yeah, and if I could, Mr. Begg, sorry, if I could just add one point, if I may. Sorry to jump in. You know, I think it's important to understand. I think it's really important to understand that take aside the professional aspect here, so take aside the wedding car profession, the funeral director profession, the effect from our side, the effect this is having on bereaved people. Now, I do a lot of work all over the UK, and I think customs in Northern Ireland and traditions in Northern Ireland are probably stronger in a lot of ways than they are anywhere else in the United Kingdom. And over the last 2 years, people have had to ditch those customs, ditch those traditions because of the pandemic. And it's been unbelievably hard for bereaved people who, through the generations, have grieved and buried or cremated their loved ones in the same way, using the same funeral director, using the same customs, the same traditions. It has been unbelievably tough for people to go through funerals in the last 2 years. And I would want, and if I'm honest, I would expect any government to do everything they can to support bereaved people in helping them bring back those traditions and those customs as quickly as possible. And funeral limousines fall very much within that. So thank you very much.
Both weddings and funeral support services, you've indicated, are generally part-time employment, and certainly in terms of the wedding industry, seasonal. So if you train up someone, and bearing in mind, could be, you've said about £500 to train someone, do they stay with you?
No, not necessarily. No, I mean, I've had guys who come down and say, Mike, it's not for me. Thanks for all your efforts, and you've paid out all these sums of money. To be fair, they've spent a lot of time doing it. I've also had drivers who have been put through the test, and then they said, thanks very much, Mike, and they've hopped into a taxi, and away they go. You know, and it's, you're footing the bill for it as well. It's, this is why there's just, you've heard, but there's just so many reasons why it doesn't work.
The system seems to be set up to fail, I have to say. In terms then of both areas, I take it you would have 1, possibly 2 bookings a day. It's generally low speed and it's generally low mileage. So in my mind, in balancing risks and regulation, it does strike me to be totally over-regulated. Would that be fair comment?
I would agree with that completely.
Very much over-regulated.
Only leaves me to think we need to continue to push this issue. This is frankly ridiculous, and when the public have difficulty being able to book a vehicle that they wish for, whether it be a funeral or a wedding, or perhaps on occasions complain about the price. Now we understand some of the difficulties that this industry is facing, and we as a committee need to do something about it.
Thank you, Roy. We'll go finally to Liz Kimmins.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you all for coming in this morning. Some of the questions I had, you've actually answered within your briefing. And as others have said, it's very clear the frustration you're feeling. I suppose one of the questions I wanted to ask is just what are your thoughts around why the department are so reluctant to bring this forward? I mean, you mentioned earlier on that when Chris Hazard was Infrastructure Minister, he'd almost got it over the line. So it's disappointing, and obviously the things have, there was a hiatus in between that. But I mean, I don't understand why that wouldn't have been taken forward even when the minister came in to place since that. And it seems nearly as if in that time frame then the department had taken steps back. So it's just to try and get a bit of an understanding of maybe your thoughts on why that's happening. And where the barriers are.
Well, for many years they had constantly used the excuse that this required change in primary legislation, which can take up to 2 years. That's what we have been told since 2005. Pete, when he was reading through the legislation 18 months ago, discovered the certificate of exemption So we have come at them now at a fresh angle, saying you don't have to change the primary legislation. You can actually use the certificate of exemption, which I believe they have done with what is it, Pete?
Childcare.
Childcare. They exempted childcare, and as far as I'm aware, they have childcare, because obviously people use cars to lift people from school and take them back to the childcare.
Courtesy transport as well.
Yeah, and courtesy transport. But at the end of the day, they've exempted them. But as far as I'm aware now, they don't even class them as taxis anymore, which is what we want. So why will they not do it with us? I have no idea. But they, at the end of the day, if you're using a car to lift kids from school, you still have to have commercial vehicle insurance, and you're certainly being paid for the service. So there's an argument there. Why have they lifted them out and actually not classed them as a taxi, but yet they'll not do it with us? Your question, I don't know why it's taken so long. They seem to be a law unto themselves. In my opinion, they listen, they sympathise, but they do nothing.
And I think to answer your question about, it almost got over the line with Minister Hazard, and why wasn't it taken up as soon as Minister Mallon came into position? Really the reason for that is, 3 months after we got the Assembly back up and running, COVID hit, in 2020. So really that sort of put a hold on everything, and then for the past 18 months we have been doing our best to try and speak to the Minister and try and get something more suitable in place.
Yeah, no, thank you, and I appreciate that. And it probably is one of those questions that's hard to answer, but I just can't understand where the real reluctance is coming from. Especially, even though you said there about COVID being a factor, if the groundwork has been, and I don't know the level of detail on it, but if a lot of the groundwork have been done, surely it is just, it's not going to take the 2 years that has been quoted. So I think that's something that we maybe as a committee could look at as well. And just I suppose on that, because I did want to, you have talked a lot about the impact of the pandemic on the industry and being excluded from the financial support for taxis, even though these are classed as taxis. It beggars belief. Do you think the department and the minister fully understand the real impact that this is having on the industry, both in terms of the pre-COVID issues and the issues that you've been facing on and off for the last 17 years, as many of you have said, and in addition to that, the pandemic and the unique situation that you've found yourselves in as a result of that? Do you think that they fully understand the impact this is having and the long-term effect of that?
I would say, if they don't, it's not through want of us trying to get them to understand. If there's this kind of unwillingness to engage, or this disinclination to kind of listen to so many of our points. And as I say, I've been only looking into this issue for the last year or so on behalf of our members. So goodness knows how. Well, I think we know how others feel who've been looking into it longer. But I think, Ms. Killens, it's really interesting that you raised that question, because that was a question I was going to ask you as a committee. Why do you think, and I'm really encouraged by a lot of what I've heard today, but why do you think when there is a groundswell, of cross-party support for this, if you like, why do you think there is such a barrier within a government department? And what power does one of the things I was going to ask you all really is, what power does the committee have in terms of knocking that barrier down?
In answer to that one, Nick, we'll find out very shortly, because we have them in straight after you. So stay tuned.
Can we stay and watch?
No, so sorry, Liz Kimmins, you want to finish on a question?
Sorry, I thought it was. I suppose, I don't actually know, and that's why I'm trying to get my head around it, as to think what would be the issue. Certainly from listening to you all this morning, and as others have said, you are pushing on an open door with this committee. We certainly feel and hear your frustration and want to make a difference to try and make things easier, to try and get you back on your feet, but also to address the issues that have been there in the longer term. So, we will commit to doing that going forward, to try and work with you. As the chair has said there, we look and see what we can do to try and change that. But thank you all, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk to us today.
Thank you.
And apologies, because I have misspoke there. We actually have the department officials up on another issue straight after this, but this is an issue in which they will be coming to the committee to talk to us about.
Okay, thank you.
You'll just have to stay tuned on that one.
Okay.
But certainly we thought it was beneficial from the committee's perspective to hear from the industry first, we were, and then for us to be given an opportunity then to have a briefing session with the department on this issue. So it's very timely. And certainly we wanted to ensure that we give you guys the opportunity to be heard before we get a response from the officials. So finally, George Robinson, I don't know if you want your hands raised, so I think you must be asking a question.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks to Peter, Andrew, Nick and Mike for coming before the committee today. And just from my own point of view, whatever the committee agrees to, I'll certainly be very, very supportive. And as far as I can see, the certificate of exemption is probably the way forward. But you have my full support from whatever the committee decides to do after you leave. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and I know you have actually submitted questions that you would like this committee to ask of the department. Be assured that that will go straight to the department in preparation for whenever they do come before the committee.
Okay.
So look, I'm not seeing any other members. I suppose the lasting memory from this session was the comments from Mike, which was the department seemed to listen, sympathise and then do nothing. That's certainly something that will stick in members' mind, because you've heard from many members right across the political spectrum, and I take from what you've said, you've had that support before. Yeah. Obviously, as a committee, we will perform our duty in scrutinising the department and trying to find a practical and sensible way forward. So just finally, and I suppose this is a point that Liz has raised, I did hear from the funeral directors. So we've spent years trying to campaign to be taken away from this, what you seem as a discriminatory piece of legislation towards your industry. And then the department bring forward a bespoke scheme for taxi drivers in the midst of COVID, and you aren't able to apply.
No, basically it came down to what the name of the insurance was. Okay. Obviously, all my vehicles are in David Andrews Wedding Cars under that name, and you had to have specific. So Peter McCracken would have had to have his own taxi insurance to be able to avail of this grant.
My goodness.
I was able to apply for some of the taxi COVID grants. Because I have my obviously taxi license, but okay. I mean it was a very small. I mean it was very small, and you know, like Pete and I had our full year's bookings wiped out in one swoop.
And from the funeral director's perspective, you guys weren't able to apply.
Actually, and the guidance for applying for the application for drivers, I excluded funeral directors specifically. So they were mentioned on the guidance, not applicable.
Okay. Okay, well listen, that's been very, very helpful. Thank you all. Can I thank Mike, Peter, Andrew and indeed Nick for attending. It's been very beneficial for the committee, and we will endeavour to keep you updated as to our deliberations. The committee will potentially also be looking at commissioning some research into this in relation to the differences in approaches between NIGB and indeed Republic of Ireland as well, because that question has come up. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you all very much.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Okay, members, we'll just wait for Nick and Andrew to leave the briefing. Okay. Okay, members, I suppose before we move on to the next item, and apologies for that, I did assume that the department was in on this issue straight after, but they will be before the committee, so we will ensure that that's arranged as soon as possible. Suppose pretty damning in relation to the presentation. I don't think I sensed one member that did participate that wasn't perplexed as to how we're actually in this situation. And I suppose, given the length of time that it has been over, I think some 17 years, I think it is incumbent upon the committee to try and get some form of resolution. There were suggestions put forward. There's a list of questions at page 23 of your table papers that will be submitted. But I'm interested if any members have any comments following that or any suggested points. Obviously, we've suggested a commissioned research piece as well. I know members wanted to find out a wee bit more information. So does any member have any comments they wish to raise? Roy Briggs? Sorry, hold on. Could somebody online just please put your hand up, and then is it Liz?
I think we have three.
No, go first, Roy.
I think we have to pursue this matter forcibly. I think there was a very, very strong argument being put there. Whether it's long-term changes or whether it's short-term, we have to push both ways. I suspect for a long time they've been put off. Oh, it'll take 2 years. It'll take 2 years. Well, let's start the 2 years at some point, and in the meantime, let's see what short-term measures can also be taken. I mean, this is just unacceptable, and it's the public that are suffering. We have to remember that it will be brides and it will be bereaved families who will be suffering when there's a shortage of drivers, and the service that the families require will not be available.
Okay, Liz Kimmins.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. I suppose, I mean, this is reminiscent of the conversations we've had as well with the bus and coach industry. I know slightly different in that it was in the context of COVID, but certainly what they have said to us in engagements over the last 18 months to 2 years is that they have been engaging with the Minister and the Department, but no matter what they've said or the issues they raised, they felt that they weren't being listened to. So I think there's a fundamental issue in relation to that. But I do think as well, going back to my comments just when the guys were in there for the briefing, I think it's worth looking at how far it got when it was being progressed to see is it something that can be picked up on rather than having to go back and start from scratch, to see if that's a way of trying to progress it a bit quicker as well. But I mean, anything we can do to move this on and move it on as quickly as possible, I think we should be doing. And I think the fact that it's gone on for 17 years is really disappointing.
I think there's a two-pronged approach there, which Roy has mentioned, which I agree with, which is absolutely, Liz, you're correct. Let's see where that was. If it was very nearing completion, surely it should be able to progress at speed, you would imagine. But if that is something in terms of a legislative timetable, that if there was short-term options that would help until such times as that could happen, albeit I think that's an appropriate way forward. So I would agree and concur with your comments, and we will include in one of the questions to the department for that briefing where that actually was at a time previous with other ministers. Andrew Muir has indicated to speak, and then Cathal Boylan.
Thanks, Chair. I think our calls are I agree with the previous speakers. It's calling for the exemptions capability to be used now, and then also the review to be undertaken. I think that's very clear calls for us to act, and the rationale for acting is very, very clear because there's a problem here and we need to act.
Okay. Cathal Boylan?
Yeah, Chair, I would support that. I mean, I think, like Liz said there, the industry hasn't been supported, besides all the other matters with the 17 years and the exclusion from consultation and all of that, that'll take a different route on the time period. I would certainly like to see how we go down the route of these exemption certificates. Let's investigate that road, but I would support the comments of any people.
Well, members, I don't hear any dissenting voices from the committee. I think that's a pretty unified voice from the committee, which is always good when presenting a case to the department. So comments will be noted from members, and what we will do is we will prepare for that briefing and questions in advance, but also it's very, very clear, and the department should know very clearly where this committee stand on the issue at present in relation to short-term option on the temporary certificates, exemptions, and indeed the long term in terms of the review of the Taxi Act. Members are content with that proposed way forward? Content?
Yeah, content.
Okay, members, thank you.
Vigorous implementation.
Pardon?
Vigorous implementation.
Okay, we'll now go to agenda item number 7, which is a departmental briefing on the second cycle flood risk management plan and reservoirs consultation, and it's at page 286 of your pack, and we'll give officials time to get settled into their space. Thank you. Okay. Okay, members, can I welcome on behalf of the committee attending in person this morning Mr Jonathan McKee, Director of DFI Rivers, Ms Alison Clydesdale, Director of Water and Drainage Policy Division, Mr Barry Spears, Water and Drainage Policy Division, and Mark Straghan, Water and Drainage Policy Division. You're all very welcome to the committee this morning, and I will hand over to you for your presentation, followed by questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members. Thank you for your invitation to brief the committee this morning. I am responsible for Water and Drainage Policy Division in the Department, and I am joined this morning by Jonathan McKee, Director of Rivers, Barry Spears, Head of Floods Directive Branch, and Mark Stranahan, Head of Flooding and Drainage Policy Branch. We are here to brief the committee on the development of the second cycle flood risk management plan for the period 2021 to 27, and I will also provide an update in relation to the Reservoirs Act 2015 and the recent consultation exercise that has just completed. In terms of the flood risk management plan, the requirement for this is in the Floods Directive regulations, which provide a consistent approach to the assessment and management of flood risk on a catchment-wide scale. Flooding, as you know, can have devastating impacts, so protecting the needs of the community is at the heart of the Flood Directive's approach. The Department for Infrastructure is the competent authority for implementing the regulations in Northern Ireland in partnership with a number of other statutory bodies, including Northern Ireland Water and local councils. The timeline of the flood risk management plan is geared to a rolling cycle, so its three key stages of assessment, mapping and planning must be repeated every 6 years. This ensures that flood risk is managed effectively and that it takes account of new information, developments and changes in risk over that period. The flood risk management planning process helps the Department and others to understand the potential impacts of flooding and inform where measures to manage flood risk could provide most benefit. This second cycle flood risk management plan, which was published in December on the Department's website, builds on the earlier plan that was published in 2015. As part of this flood risk management cycle, the first cycle plans were reviewed and updated to take into account the changes in flood risk and any new information since the first cycle. This new plan also reports on how the measures in the first cycle flood risk management plan have been implemented. The information from the 2018 Northern Ireland Flood Risk Assessment, as well as updated flood hazard and risk maps, informed both the review of the first cycle plan and the development of this second cycle plan. Importantly, the 2018 Flood Risk Assessment also included an analysis of the effects of climate change. There are a couple of key differences between the first cycle plan and the second. Namely, the second cycle plan consolidates each of Northern Ireland's three principal river basin districts into one plan, and the inclusion of surface water flooding in the assessment has also changed the focus of the second cycle plan, resulting in an increased emphasis on surface water management. The plan continues to promote the 3 Ps approach of flood risk management, which are prevention, protection and preparedness in relation to managing aspects of flood risk. The plan also sets out a framework in which measures will be delivered or planned for at local level. A key element of this plan is also that it highlights in Chapter 5 of the plan the flood hazards and risks in 12 areas of potential significant flood risk that were identified in the 2018 Flood Risk Assessment. Specific measures tailored to manage the flood risk in these 12 areas include investigation and development of flood alleviation schemes, completion of enhanced drainage area plans, community engagement and the establishment of community resilience groups. In addition, the plan recognises that flooding can occur outside these 12 areas of potential significant flood risk, and should this happen, then measures to address such flooding may be developed and prioritised alongside those currently included in the second cycle. 4 of the 12 areas of the potential significant flood risk are also included in the geographical area covered by the Living with Water programme, which committee members will be familiar with. The Living with Water programme promotes schemes and concepts to manage water in an integrated way to mitigate flood risk. As a result, therefore, the Living with Water plan for Belfast links closely to this flood risk management plan. The plan also sets out a series of regional measures which apply across all of Northern Ireland, supporting sustainable management of flood risk for both the 12 areas of potential significant flood risk and the wider river basin districts. These regional measures span a number of ongoing flood risk activities and include the provision of advice to planning authorities, provision of a grant for individual property protection, and maintenance and capital improvement in the flood defence and drainage networks. It's also important to highlight to the members that the Department fully recognises the importance of the water environment in which we work, and a strategic environmental assessment and a habitats regulation assessment accompany the flood risk management plan, and those are also published on the Department's website. As required by the regulations, a public consultation on the draft second cycle plan took place during the first 6 months of 21. The consultation process was an important step in shaping the management of flood risk throughout Northern Ireland over the 6-year life cycle of the plan. The consultation was directly emailed to over 260 consultees, Section 75 groups, MPs, MLAs, government departments and other stakeholders, internal and external to government, as well as being available to the public through the normal channels. In tandem, a targeted consultation was also carried out as part of the strategic environmental assessment process, namely with DERA and with the transboundary environmental consultees in the Republic of Ireland. As a result, 22 responses were received, 5 were general in nature and 17 were substantive responses. Account was taken of the comments received in producing the final plan, and a list of the changes resulting from the consultation is included in the plan. The flood risk management plans, environmental reports and the public consultation report itself were published on the website in December 2021. So moving on to the Reservoirs Act, I would just like to update the committee on progress in respect of the consultation on the secondary legislation to further commence and implement the Act. Following statutory responsibility for the Reservoirs Act transferring to the Department with effect from the 2nd of June 21, the Minister considered the further commencement and implementation of the Act. The Minister issued a targeted consultation on the 29th of November 21, providing details of the planned further commencement of the Act and setting out proposals to be included in secondary legislation, including the draft designation criteria for reservoirs. Consultation just ended on the 23rd of January 22 and we have received 18 responses. While officials have not had an opportunity to consider each consultation response in detail just yet, an initial high-level review indicates some potential concerns regarding costs associated with the introduction of the legislation. However, there is general support for the regulations that we provide for a support scheme. Some respondents have also raised the potential of a loss of community assets or environmental impacts due to the costs associated with reservoir managers maintaining reservoirs in accordance with the legislation. So detailed consideration of the responses will be progressed over the coming weeks and a consultation report will be developed and published on the Department's website in due course. Consideration will also be given to any changes required to the draft orders, regulations or draft designation criteria following the consultation. With the consultation now complete, however, that does pave the way for commencement orders and regulations to be made to implement the reservoir safety regime envisaged by the Act in the new Assembly mandate. Once introduced, the regulations will allow for consideration of a support scheme to assist with the cost of reservoir safety works. Any support scheme will, of course, be subject to the normal business case approval processes, ministerial approval and availability of funding in due course. That's the end of my opening remarks, Chair, but we would certainly welcome questions that you may have regarding the flood risk management plans or the reservoir consultation.
Thank you, Alison. Can we thank you for your detailed presentation? Given that you have said that there will be further examination and exploration of the consultation in terms of how that is in the finite in relation to the responses, can I ask, was the Department happy with the outcome of the consultation in relation to the number of people that responded and the response to it? And on a broad overview, do you feel that consultees will be content with the plans that have been put in place?
We just received 18 responses and we had sent it to quite a few hundred people, so I suppose that's quite a low level. It was sent targeted to reservoir managers who the regulations would impact the most. I'll maybe turn to Mark, who can maybe give you some more detail on the responses as he's looking through those.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think generally we're content. This was a targeted consultation. When the Act was introduced, when the Act was made in 2015, the policy framework is effectively there. So what we're now trying to do is introduce the Act. So this was a targeted consultation, basically targeting the reservoir managers. And what we're trying to do is bring forward the secondary legislation that will help them actually implement the Act. So yes, 18 responses is a significant number of responses. The key issue that's been highlighted is in relation to costs and potential costs in introducing the Act. But at the same time, there is a lot of support for the potential for a grant scheme to be brought forward. And you'll notice in the regulations, the Minister is bringing forward regulations to allow for a grant scheme to be developed.
Could you provide more detail on the grant scheme?
Well, at this stage, basically, until the regulations are implemented, the department isn't in a position to progress a grant scheme. So at the moment, what we're doing is we're looking at options in terms of a grant scheme. So there's work ongoing within the department in terms of developing a business case. That business case is in development, and the responses from the consultation, for example, will help inform the development of that business case.
Okay, and you've mentioned in some of the responses there was concern regarding costs associated with the legislation. And do we have any broad overview of potential costs or more detail in relation to it?
We don't have finite details really. It will depend on each reservoir on a case-by-case basis, but that concern was coming mostly from reservoir managers who would be responsible, obviously, for this. So the costs really would be very, very variable. You know, we couldn't really say at this point what, give you an exact figure.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll now move to members for questions. So we first have Cathal Boylan, Andrew Muir, and then Roy Beggs.
Thank you, Chair, and could I welcome the officials, and thanks very much for the presentation. Just on a couple of points, I want to start obviously with the Reservoirs Act first. And I brought it up at the committee last week, Chair. There's some groups out there, like the anglers, who feel they weren't consulted properly with and have major concerns with the proposals. Can you outline why this consultation wasn't online? And I appreciate you said targeted, but surely those people are going to be impacted most, should have been consulted with. So can you outline how the proposals will help them, if they're adversely impacted by any of the new proposals? What's in place to support them in any way? Is there any proposal to support those groups?
Yes, certainly. So the Ulster Angling Federation was emailed the consultation directly, and they sent in a consultation response and raised some queries with us, and we met with them directly. Mark met with them to hear their concerns. Obviously, the regulations place duty on the reservoir managers, not on the groups who use the reservoirs. But I'll maybe hand over to Mark. He might be able to give you a bit more detail on the meeting.
Yes, certainly costs are a major concern for the angling federations. And for example, it was a targeted consultation, as we say, but the Ulster Angling Federation, Annex F of the consultation document set out all the people that were targeted. And the Ulster Angling Federation, for example, has 55 associations and 6,000 anglers, involved, that they'd be feeding in responses for. What I would say is, the concern is that costs would be transferred potentially from reservoir managers to anglers, for example. So fees and so forth may go up. There are concerns. They had concerns around that reservoirs could be abandoned, for example, because of costs. So they had concerns around that. But as I say, the regulations, the Minister has set out in the regulations the potential for a grant scheme to be developed. That's been included in the regulations. So once the regulations are through, the Department will be in a position to consider that further. And we are doing some early work in developing a business case to look at options around that, so that there will be assistance available for groups going forward.
I appreciate it, Mark, but tell me, so say I've seen then that what you're saying to me is that the Ulster Angling Federation, they cover the main body of anglers out there who are using the reservoirs, yeah?
Yes.
Because I'd be concerned that some, like saying it wasn't online and it was targeted, I wouldn't like to think that some of the groups, some of the people who had contacted me may not be represented by the Anglers Federation. So that's what my main concern would be. Yeah. So you're saying you've met them and there's something in place now to try and address that, yeah?
Well, certainly I've met them. I've sort of discussed their concerns with them. We discussed the way forward in terms of implementing the Act, the fact that there was a regulation coming through that would allow for a grant scheme to be developed. So we had those discussions with the Ulster Angling Federation. I would advise that, for example, there's also on the targeted consultation was the Ulster Coarse Fishing Federation, and and other groups. So, as I say, I mean, these were the key groups that were targeted in terms of a consultation.
Just back on the question, Chair, on flooding, on the issue of the floods directive. In terms of cross-border discussions to try and mitigate against any of those issues, if there's something like, if it's mutually beneficial to have those discussions, is there any discussions the Department had with the South in relation to the floods directive?
Yes, maybe I could take that one. Yes, there is ongoing engagement with the OPW, Office of Public Works in the Republic of Ireland, with regards to the implementation of the Floods Directive, and that's going on just not in the preparation of the plan, but that goes on an ongoing basis, both on an operational level and at a more strategic level in relation to the plan. So that work has been ongoing and continues, Chair. Mr. Boylan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your answers. Thanks, Chair.
Alison, you wanted to come back on a point there? Do you want to clarify
I just wanted to add just about the consultation. So it was actually published on the department's website, and the list of consultees is Annex F. So in addition to the Ulster Angling Federation, there's also the Ulster Coarse Fishing Federation as well, and that list of consultees is there if you want to have a look at it.
Thank you. Now, Andrew Muir, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the officials for coming in relation to both matters, which are extremely important. Just going to really address the whole issue in terms of the reservoirs. First of all, I outlined this at the time when the transfer of function order eventually came to the Chamber. My disappointment that we are where we are in terms of progress and commencement of this Reservoirs Act. I understood obviously there was 3 years without an executive, but the executive was re-established in January 2020, and we're only now looking at moving forward in relation to commencement of many areas of this. So I just want to have an update from officials on the timescales ahead in terms of getting this Act commenced as soon as possible, because it's really important that we have those protections in place. The other one is that has there been any bid as part of the draft three-year budget for the grant schemes? Because I would agree with other members of this committee that grant support is absolutely crucial in relation to ensuring that the maintenance of these reservoirs, and there's many organisations who desperately need grant support. So whether there's been any bids for funding as part of that three-year budget. I have a further question, but this was first two just to start with.
Okay, just on the timeline. So, as you know, the department didn't get statutory responsibility for the Reservoirs Act until June this year. So we've put the consultation out now in November. The legislation is quite detailed. It's all set out in the consultation there. There's over 100 clauses there, so it's taken a bit of time just to get that all ready to go. But we are hopeful that once we get the consultation response, and dependent on the approval of the Minister, that it would be ready to go as soon as we get into the new mandate. It's a mixture of negative resolution and draft affirmative resolution, but that would be planned for as early as possible in the new mandate. Second question, I think, was in relation to budget. We're still working through a business case on that, looking at the options on the quantum of the budget, and the capital budget wouldn't just be known at the moment. But there is obviously the process of in-year budgeting and within the draft three-year budget that would take account of that. We wouldn't have any idea of the total budget required just at the moment, and we are still subject to approval from both the Minister and DOF in that respect.
Okay. Has there been any scoping just in relation to the potential budgets? Because I'm hearing stuff back from people in terms of the envisaged costs here. I just want to see if the department has any idea in terms of ballpark figure of what a grant scheme would need to be.
We don't have a ballpark figure. As I said earlier, it's very variable. I think the best I could say to you is it's likely to be millions. It's obviously dependent on a case-by-case basis, depending on the size of the reservoir and the condition of the reservoir, and all of that has to be inspected. So it really is a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, because I can remember, I think it was a while ago that the committee got a confidential briefing on the state of the reservoirs, and there was reports undertaken in relation to those. If I can recall, those reports were for 2016. So the department should have a fair understanding of the conditions of those reservoirs, and in order to enable that to be compiled. The other questions really, you're saying that this would require approval by the Minister and different resolutions. If there is no Minister in place, does this bring all this to a halt then?
that will depend, I guess, what happens after the election. I'm not sure I can particularly answer that at this point.
Okay, just one last question, and as an MLA for North Down, I think it's important I do raise this. It's a key issue for the people of North Down, particularly of Bangor, but and it's the impact of the delay in commencement of this reservoirs legislation is having a resultant impact, which is in relation to Clandyboy Lake, which is a reservoir in Bangor. That is also having an impact upon a regeneration scheme in Bangor, which has the potential to trigger £50 million worth of regeneration in Bangor, but that application is being held up because of the issues surrounding Clandyboy Lake. Can I ask officials, can they please tell me where the timescales are for resolution of these issues, and if those issues are so serious, when about the department is going to tell the people of Bangor in relation to their concerns in relation to the lake?
Maybe Chair, if I can answer that question. Yes, thank you. So we have been engaging with our colleagues in planning in the department in relation to this matter for quite some time. We've also been engaging with Council and the Department for Communities to try and seek a resolution. We're obliged in terms of our responses to respond in accordance with planning policy, and we have done that, but we've also been as flexible as we can whenever we're engaging with those that have interests in this development to see if there is a way forward, and we continue to do that. Even as recently as within the last couple of weeks, we have met with the developer in relation to an analysis of our model, for example. In terms of timescales, because it is really a planning matter, it's the planning officials in the department who are considering this, and I understand that they're actively considering it as we speak, with a view to trying to bring it to some conclusion. But at this point in time, I have no further information other than that.
Okay.
Yeah, just one question. I know I'm trying your patience, Chair, but we're being told the application can't really be allowed to proceed because of the issues concerning the lake. Do the people of Bangor need to be told in relation to the concerns in relation to the lake, or are these concerns resolvable and within the near future so we can allow this application to proceed?
Okay, fair enough.
Maybe, Chair, it's worth reminding some members who were part of the closed session briefing that we had in relation to reservoirs and their condition. And just in a public session like this, I would be reluctant to divulge any information that might reveal some of the vulnerabilities of any particular reservoir. So
okay,
I'm not being restrictive or unhelpful, but just in the public session.
I'm content to draw that at a line there. Thank you, Andrew, for your questions. Okay,
thank you.
We now go to Roy Beggs for a final question.
Again, thanks for your briefing. And I've taken a look online. There's a very useful tool online in terms of the flooding maps that are provided and referred to in your document. And I see from that you have now new categories, which is updated areas subjected to possible flooding as a result of climate change in terms of rivers flooding, sea flooding and additional surface water. I take it that's because of the prediction of increased volume and intensity of rainfall. Is that the cause of these new categories that are now mapped?
I'm not sure whether Barry wants to come in.
Yeah, well, the mapping that was used for the flood risk assessment was based on a series of return periods, and it's quite a technical assessment. But as well as that, there was a general analysis for climate change also taken into account, which gives us these new outlines, as you have said, Mr. Begg. So that is really a tool for both the department to use to assess the vulnerability of areas with regards to climate change, and also for the general public to use, and planning, etc., to use to make decisions, help them make decisions, not only for flood risk that we are experiencing now, but flood risk that we will experience in the future. I'm not sure now if that exactly answers your question, Mr. Beggs.
That's helpful. Again, just to clarify, in terms of these new flood maps that are there, is that which are they that which departments will be using to assess critical infrastructure that's needed for the public? You know, we saw in England, for example, substations being flooded in areas. So is that type of assessment being carried out for using these new maps as the datum point?
Yeah. Do you want to go into
Maybe, Chair, I can answer this one. So the information that's produced in terms of our models and our maps, we use that for the development of flood alleviation projects. and we take climate change into account. So the information that you will be seeing, we will be using that same data and using that for the design and the development of our schemes.
Okay, and planning was mentioned, so there are new maps that are now out there. Are they the maps that you as a department will be feeding responses into any planning application with?
So what we do at present is that whenever we're responding to a planning consultation, we advise the planning authorities of the areas of a development that fall within present day floodplains, and also the areas that would fall potentially within a climate change floodplain, and that will allow them to make whatever planning determination they have to based on the most up-to-date flood risk information.
Okay, that's helpful. Turning to the Reservoirs Act briefly then, in the past you've indicated to us that there were issues of having difficulty to track down who the actual owner was of some of your reservoirs, so that assessments could be carried out as to the appropriate actions to be taken and the relative safety of each reservoir. Has that progressed any further? Have you been able to identify the owner of every reservoir?
Since we last met to discuss the reservoirs issue in the closed session, our work has continued in the absence of the legislation to encourage managers to fulfil their common law responsibilities to ensure that their structures are safe. Obviously, without that legislative framework, we are limited in what we can do, and we continue to make good progress in identifying who owns reservoirs and encouraging them to fulfil the obligations of their common law responsibility, and if they have a report carried out on their reservoir, to make sure that the matters in the interest of safety are addressed. As it stands at present, I believe we know the managers of most, if not all of them.
Can you tell us how many reservoirs you don't know who the owner is, and as such don't know who to contact, so that the public's safety is ensured?
There is one reservoir where we believe we know who owns it, and they're contesting whether they own it.
Okay, I'll let you pursue that then. And then just finally then, in terms of the increased flood maps and categories and taking on board climate change, would I be right in saying the risks to reservoirs will have increased because of that increased flooding areas that have been identified?
Well, with increased rainfall and the intensity of rainfall, that puts a pressure on all drainage infrastructure, and reservoirs are no different. Okay. So the risk would increase if you had catastrophic flows, for example, in a watercourse leading into a reservoir, and then in turn the reservoir wasn't able to safely discharge those flows. That increases the risk then of some sort of failure mechanism in the reservoir. So climate change can have a negative impact.
And have you a planned schedule for when all the reservoirs will be regulated appropriately and managed for the public safety?
Once the Reservoirs Act is fully commenced, in parallel with that process, as a department, we will be developing the processes and the procedures that would allow for the effective administration of the Act. But it would be at least a couple of years before that legislative cycle, if you like, turns a cycle, as we engage with managers and perhaps even have to enforce the legislation before we would be in a position of seeing substantive improvement.
Okay. Okay. Finally, Liz Kimmins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I had missed part of the briefing, but it's just, I suppose, a more specific question in terms of the flood alleviation plans. I mean, Newry, as others know, as part of my constituency, is one of the areas of potential significant flood risk. And last year we welcomed the alleviation measures that were being introduced. And I know certainly over the last 10 to 15 years in particular, Newry has suffered very badly from flooding events throughout the centre of the town. And obviously we need to properly prepare and protect Newry from flooding going forward. So it was just to see if there's any update, I suppose, on future works for Newry, if you're able to comment with regards to flood protection, and how does the department intend to work with councils and their local development plans on that?
Chair, maybe there's a number of questions there I'll perhaps deal with. So Newry is one of the significant flood risk areas. It was during the first cycle of the flood risk management plans and still is with this cycle. And we have plans afoot to put in place flood alleviation measures. The project for Newry is split over 3 phases. So phase 1's already on the ground as we speak, works in the Greenbank industrial estate area and other parts of Newry, and that will provide flood protection to some of those areas. The second phase is at the design stage, so we're working through the proposals to improve the flood defences through the centre of the city, and that will involve actually storing water outside of Newry. So we're looking at the potential for storing water upstream, and that will be the third phase of the three phases in terms of the scheme. We're working very closely with Council to determine how that upstream storage could be affected. We have strong links with the Council, and that's proven to be very beneficial in identifying possible areas to explore. And we also have good links in terms of the planning authorities as we're working through the local development plan process to make sure that, insofar as we can, that the strong policies that we've enjoyed in PPS 15, that policy framework continues into the local development plans, and that engagement continues right across all council areas.
Okay, no, thanks for that. I mean, that's actually quite good to hear, because I know certainly it's something that can cause issues with plan applications if sites are on a floodplain or things like that. So hopefully the proposed works will help with that. Just a quick, another quick question, just in terms of the first flood risk management plan and the measures that have not yet been completed. It was just to see, are there any outstanding actions from the previous plan, and will they be prioritised in the new plan?
Chair, maybe Barry will come in, but just as a general overview, the first cycle of flood risk management plans provided the Department an opportunity to move from a reactive process in managing flood risk to a proactive process, whereby we were identifying and mapping and then putting in place the measures to manage that risk. We've made progress in a significant number of areas, but there are a number of measures from the old plans, the 2015 to 21 plans, that remain to be addressed. They're being prioritised as far as we can. It's worth pointing out that, for example, in Coleraine, no viable flood alleviation scheme was identified, so that can't be taken forward. And similarly, other areas of flood risk became known to us during that 6-year period, and we have been looking at taking forward projects in those areas. Where we are now with the commencement of the new cycle of plans is it's providing us with a really good opportunity to take stock of how we got on in the last cycle and what measures do we need to put in place in terms of our delivery teams and scoping out the capital investment needed so that we get onto the front foot in managing flood risk. And that's where the true benefit of the plans really come into focus. It allows us to see what the flood risk management vision needs to be, and we're, as we speak, identifying the investment and the delivery teams that are needed.
Okay.
Thank you. That's very positive. Thank you, Chair.
I think Jonathan's covered it. And yeah, the uncompleted measures have transitioned into the new plans and will be forgotten about, basically. So.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other member indicating. Oh, George Robinson. Sorry, George, go on ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the officials for their presentation as well. Couple of questions. Contingency plans, particularly during the summer there, whenever there's a dry spell, is all those, is your contingency plans always in place? And at the moment, is all the reservoirs working at full capacity? And maybe more a hypothetical question, how many reservoirs have we got throughout Northern Ireland? Maybe you can't answer that one, but I just ask it anyway.
So, Chair, I'll address the questions insofar as I can. So in terms of our contingency plans, whenever we began the process of implementation of the first cycle of plans, we had the experience of dealing with quite a number of significant flooding events before that. And obviously our emergency response was an area of work in the department that we focused heavily on, not just ourselves, but building relationships with all of our multi-agency partners, and indeed developing relationships with communities that are at flood risk to ensure that they're as resilient as they can be. So our plans are in place, they're well developed, they are tested regularly, not just within the department but with all of our partners, and so the coordinated response to flooding is much improved from what it would have been, say, a decade ago. All of that being said, and all of the good work that has been done, it is possible that you could have a flooding event, particularly in the summer when heavy thundery downpours occur, that overwhelm drainage infrastructure and indeed overwhelm the capacity of all of the responding organisations. So we could find ourselves, particularly with the impacts of climate change, facing that scenario. But as we stand today, all the plans that can be made have been made, and we test them to ensure that they're fit for purpose. You asked a question in relation to the number of reservoirs. I can confirm that there are 179 controlled reservoirs in Northern Ireland at present. That figure can vary as more information comes to light in terms of the size of them, but that's the figure at present, 179.
Okay. Content enough, George?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. Thanks to the officials for their answers.
Okay, thank you. Could I thank officials for attending this morning with your briefing, and we will continue on with our deliberations. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we are moving to agenda item number 8, which is the written briefing consideration of draft budget response to the Committee for Finance. You can find this at page 292, 293, 299 and 303 of your packs. Okay, I will hand over to the clerk if he wants to pass comment on the list of correspondence, obviously from the clerk's memo. Members have had a chance to read, no doubt. We're taking this. I've seen the clerk's memo and the draft response from the committee. Would the committee be content with that response? Or maybe we'll ask the clerk just to maybe talk us through some elements of it before we agree.
Sure, the response is largely the evidence that has been taken by the committee to date from the department, from NI Water and from TransLink. Yep. Based on the committee's discussion, I've drawn up what I think the committee seems to have come out with, put it into a form of words. So it's down to the committee to say whether or not members agree with that, with those conclusions. Okay, members, does anybody have a particular objection with the drafted response as it stands on your committee pack? Not saying that. Members are content. Oh, David?
Did I see somewhere about the York Gate interchange?
York Street interchange
in relation to the cost so far? Is that within that information, or is that a different piece of correspondence?
We would check.
Page 301, budget, York Street interchange. The committee has asked how much has been spent by the department to date on the York Street interchange.
Yeah. So that, David, is
21.4 million.
Yeah.
And there's not a spade in the ground.
Yeah. So that's the minister's response on the number of issues that we raised.
Right.
But yeah, quite concerning indeed. In relation to the draft response, you can find it, members, at page. I'll just start at the start of it, hold on. Page 293 through to page 298 of your packs. It's a broad overview, members, of what we've been discussing.
It is, but it's fairly accurate, yeah.
Your members are content with that draft response?
Sure, just said that the conclusions commence at page 297.
Yeah, I can read for the benefit of the members. I'll read the conclusions. That the committee recognises the challenges presented by the executive by the competing priorities and pressures across departments for the provision of public services. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, these pressures have been exacerbated in the last 2 years. This has especially been the case in respect of priority areas such as health, education and the economy. The committee is not optimistic that the final draft budget will differ significantly from what is proposed for the draft budget 22 to 25. On that basis, the committee recognises that, as the Minister has stated, that the proposed budget does not meet the Department's inescapable pressures. This will lead to difficult decisions on what can be prioritised and delivered by the Department over the budget period. The committee will expect the Minister and officials to consult appropriately with it to consider options and to obtain the committee's views on prioritisation as required under paragraph 20 of Strand 2 of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which states the Executive Committee will seek to agree each year and review, as necessary, a programme incorporating an agreed budget linked to policies and programmes subject to the approval of the Assembly after scrutiny in Assembly Committee, emphasis added on a cross-community basis. So members, look, I'm not going to read down through the rest of it. It's there in front of you. You will see the key policy areas. Are members content? Key policy areas: Northern Ireland Water, long-term investment in affordable and sustainable public transport, active travel initiatives, improvement to enhance road safety, timely road maintenance and improvement, and key road and rail infrastructure projects. Members broadly content with what we have in front of us?
Yeah. Broadly content. The one thing which I think might be worth adding was we have been made aware that officials have been struggling with the issue of adopted roads, for example, following the previous staffing significant reductions. So if there's a way of reflecting that, because it's saying it's got a difficult budget, but it's already in a position.
We could say
where it's
timely road maintenance and improvements and adoptions as well. So that's obviously a broad overview of where we're, it's not specific.
Yeah, okay.
So that can
Add
be,
the adoptions in that.
that word adoption can be added there, which is broad
Content with
overview.
that.
Okay, members. I don't see any other members, so we're content enough. Okay.
So are members content then with the, as it stands with that addition?
Yes.
Or would members like it to come back next week for final?
Are members content with that one word addition, which is basically adoption? I don't think there should be a dissent in the committee for that. It's in relation to roads that haven't been adopted and the pressures facing the department on that and financially. Members content?
Yeah.
Content. Okay, we're happy to move on. Okay, members, we'll now move to agenda item number 9, which is the forward work programme. I draw members' attention to the proposed draft forward work programme at page 307, draft forward work programme. Are members content? I don't see
Content.
any. Yeah. Just what we've seen there, we're looking through, obviously, DVA enforcement. That is an evidence session on the 16th. Now, given what we have just heard, particularly on the taxi aspect, is that included in that briefing session? Yeah, I would like to, if we could, so that department briefing on DVA enforcement, I think if it's the taxi reps that will be coming up, obviously on enforcement, that they're given adequate notice that a major issue for the committee is what we've just discussed this morning, and that'll form a basis for the discussion.
And there was
an agreed position by the committee, so I think that's the
Timely opportunity, yeah.
That's the opportunity. Okay. So members are content that we will inform officials via our questions, but also that briefing session will be about, yes, DVA enforcement, but the issue of the wedding and the issues relating to funeral and taxi act. Okay?
Content.
Okay, members, thank you. We'll now move to agenda item number 10, which is any other business. I do have one, which is tabled at page 28, which is from Andrew in relation to the Ars and North Down Borough Council major planning application. I suppose probably comments as a committee chair. I'm probably reluctant that we receive an oral briefing, particularly on one major planning application. But if you do note there in the forward work programme, we do have the department in actually next week on the review of the Planning Act, which, if we go by the Audit Office report, major planning applications are a serious concern. So I would say to Andrew, yes, on record, and understand the frustrations, but perhaps that would be a timely place to ask about major planning applications, and as such the one affecting Ards and North Down. Would you be content with that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think if we could change it to stay written brief, and if they're going to come back to us in writing, obviously we can raise that next week. But look, there's real frustration with this. The department took his application in January of last year, and there's been very little progress since then. And we really feel like we're banging our head off the wall here in terms of trying to get progress in this. So simply the request is for the department to provide a briefing, whether it's oral next week or written, in relation to the issue, but also to urge the minister to get this moving. This is like walking through treacle in terms of getting progress in this, and the people of Bangor are extremely frustrated. So apologies if I'm raising this under AOB, but we're trying to use every opportunity to try to get this moving, and getting things moving within planning in the department is extremely frustrating.
Andrew, on planning and major applications and in time delays and statutory consultations, I think the people of Northern Ireland PLC are walking through treacle when it comes to the current backlogs in planning. So look, it is on the record. There will be an in-person briefing next week, and we can certainly raise it. Members, I know a lot of people have lit up here now for any other business. I will bring Cathal and Liz in. I'd ask you to be extremely brief, because we want to have a break here before we're back in at 12:45 for the closed session with the individual groups. So I'll go to Cathal and Liz very quick.
Chair, just quickly, I'd like the support of the committee to direct to the Minister to ask her what she's doing about, there's new proposals under the future agricultural policy, which the ERS run at the minute, to change the claim payments. It's basically claim payments at the minute is for 3 hectares, and their proposals are to change it to 10 hectares. And the reason why I asked the question is that will impact on small farmers, and more importantly, will impact on the opportunity for those farmers to continue to live in the countryside if small farmers want to carry out that function in the future. So we need to write to the Minister to see how she engaged with the Area Minister in relation to that matter.
Okay, we can certainly write to ask what engagement has been had, but we will not adopt a committee position until such times as we see a response on that. Members agreed with that action point? Agreed. Okay. Liz Kimmins, briefly, please.
Can I just pick up one as well? Chair, I've been speaking with the bus and coach industry, and they are quite concerned, obviously, with recent events and the collapse of the executive, that it's to see if we could get an urgent update from the department in terms of the financial support scheme for the industry, to see is it over the line, because they are very worried that this could impact on that, and whether they'll access it. So it could be that, please.
So what we will do is we will write to the department to see where exactly that is. My understanding is that it was signed off, so we will certainly get a response to the committee ASAP on that issue. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, members, thank you very much. We'll now move to agenda item number 11, which is date, time and location of the next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 16th of February 2022 in room 29. Could I advise members, please, that if possible, members attending the session following the committee, please log online to the meeting at 12:45 to address any technical issues in preparation for the groups coming on at 1. If we can get on time and get this done, we'll not take up too much of members' time, because we will have an opportunity to hear them over that hour, and then that will put to rights those outstanding requests for a committee session. Okay, members?
Chair, can I just clarify in relation to the request I made? Are we content to write to the Minister to ask that all efforts are made to ensure that the issues are addressed and enable the Council to move ahead? It's just, are we happy to write to the Minister to ask her to get this moving?
Well, I think I'm reluctant, Andrew, obviously, to on the hoof without knowing the background of a particular planning application to put a committee seal of approval on it like that. But certainly we could write to the Minister asking what are the outstanding issues surrounding the application, if that would help to establish a position.
Whatever we can do to get it moving, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, members. Are members content to write to the Minister asking what the outstanding issues are in relation to that particular application? Have we agreed? Okay, members. Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber.